Alright, hello everybody. We're gonna get started here. So, hello everybody. My name is Jason. I'm current secretary, second year CSEC student. And today I'll be talking about the SolarWinds hack that happened back in December. There we go. So in case you missed it, SolarWinds got hacked back in December. It was originally reported on December 11th that the hack occurred, and by the 12th, the CISA, or Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, issued Emergency Directive 2101, which basically directing all government agencies that use SolarWinds to switch to a different system and turn it off so they can audit the system and find out how compromised everything was. On December 18th, about a week afterwards, the stock market, the SolarWinds stock had fell about 40% in reaction to the hacks happening. And in January 2021, we finally got some information about some blog posts. A lot of security companies jumped on and did some research on it and started publishing stuff. So now we have some information about what happened. We can kind of go through it and analyze what's been going on. This was a supply chain attack that really kind of showcases the dangers of using third-party software in your enterprise, within your network, and the vulnerabilities that can be exposed even if you have a good enterprise security. So the question still remains: who carried out this attack? It is lots of groups are calling this UNC 2452, but it has not been confirmed, or no group has really taken responsibility for the attack yet. Washington Post decided that they're going to call it Cozy Bear. Wikipedia jumped onto that one, though it has not been confirmed who led the attack yet. But it is highly suspected that it is a nation-state actor with ties to Russia intelligence, and in particular the SVR, which is basically the CIA of Russia. So in short, this breach led to over 400 Fortune 500 companies being compromised, and over a dozen government agencies being compromised, including the State Department, Treasury Department, and the Department of Homeland Security. They engineered a supply chain attack to compromise all these organizations, and in more detail, which we'll get into more specifically in the future, they did some DLL injects. They used some customized Cobalt Strike malware loaders, and some other advanced attacks to get access to Microsoft Cloud and Azure, and other fun things on the infrastructure that they had compromised. So when you guys go to read about this, if you choose to, there's a couple of different names floating out there. There's Sunburst, which is the name that FireEye has given this entire attack. Microsoft is calling the same thing SolarGate, but they spelled it correctly with two O's in the beginning, not an A. And unrelated to Sunburst, but still kind of prevalent on SolarWinds Orion software, is Supernova. It's another vulnerability that is currently being patched, that you can also probably find some information about. I'm going to talk about that one in this presentation. Some of the components that were used as specific loaders and droppers were RainDrop and TEARDROP. RainDrop and TEARDROP are both used by Microsoft. Mandiant and FireEye found one of them, and Symantec has been analyzing the other one. And in this presentation, I'll be using TA to talk about threat actors, and they're also just known as the attackers in this situation. So a supply chain attack is what happened here, and in essence, it's when you gain access to your target by going after a weaker link within their supply chain. So if you think about like a grocery store, how they get their food that they sell to all of us, they have to go from the farmer to the distributor, they have to transport it to the store, and then they have to shelve it, and then it gets sold to the consumer. So in all of those steps, if you can impact the consumer that's your target by taking out the weakest part of that link, of that chain. And so in our hack, our supply chain, the weakest link in that was not any endpoints within enterprise security of all of these firms or all of these government agencies, but it was in fact the SolarWinds Orion software that was used by all of these people. And a DLL inject, which we're also going to talk about a little bit later, is just a attack method that allows you to enable code execution within another program's address space by forcing it to load a malicious DLL. And it's a common thing that you'll see on Windows, because that's kind of how they work and where they work. So in the first step of the attack chain, in the attack lifecycle, they gain initial access to the SolarWinds build server. And this happened back in September 2019. It has still been unconfirmed of how it happened, but some theories have been ruled out. SolarWinds doesn't necessarily have the best mindset for security, mostly because one of their server passwords for a couple of years was SolarWinds123. Not necessarily a great password to have on your build servers. Additionally, in the past, another group was selling access to SolarWinds infrastructure and technology on the black market, but it's been ruled out that those two techniques were not how this attack started. So after getting initial access to the build servers, the attackers spent about 2 or 3 months kind of just testing their ability to modify code to remain undetected and seeing what they could do on the system, trying to get an understanding of what was happening and what their limits were. The first thing that they did after they kind of established that first thing that they did after they established their boundaries of, I guess, for their scope, they added new classes, they created a new couple of methods, and they changed some DLLs to create a backdoor within the system. So on the right here is one of the methods that they compromised. This is what it normally looks like, and we'll get a better picture in a minute. But on the left here, they added this whole reply block that created a new thread that basically started the backdoor and created the opportunity for them to get into the system across all of the hosts. So yeah, so here's the backdoor that they installed. There's a better look at the try block that they created. And here is the regular looking method that they altered.
Can you go back for 1 second, dude? First 1 second. Stop moving it, bro.
Yeah, so just to look at it, basically they spun up a new thread, and within the initialized method that they also compromised, they put in some code to create this backdoor.
There you go, there's some C# for you.
What? Oh, look at that.
Look at that.
Look how good that is, guys.
Look how using the biggest hack in the world, C#.
I didn't say I didn't use C++. I just said I used C#.
Okay. So after they've established their persistence within the DLL file, they created their communications with their C2s through the backdoor. But one of the things that's been really interesting to observe about this attack and their whole mentality about it is they've done everything they can to remain undetected for as long as possible. So once the backdoor was installed, it went into a period of dormancy for about 2 weeks, which means they didn't do anything except for sleep. And after that 2 weeks, it came alive, ran a bunch of tests to see if it was in the right environment that they're trying to compromise. And they were trying to avoid being on a security researcher's laptop in the wrong environment and not in a place where they could get valuable data. And if it was not in that right system, they just went back to being dormant or kind of just moved on. So after it comes alive, it went through a period of data collection and exfiltration, established a connection with its primary C2, and collects more data. Then after a period of time, the threat actors spun up another C2 that they would use to communicate with the backdoor to have code execution. And this was all happening around February of 2020. And the real way that they were able to compromise such a wide variety of companies and government agencies was by rolling out this infected backdoor into the Orion updates that got pushed to all of their clients. And when that happened, they now had access to over 18,000 hosts. So here's a graphic developed by Microsoft to kind of go over everything we just talked about. So it started off with a DLL inject into what they would call the SolarWinds.orion.core.businesslayer.dll. You see a walk through the backdoor activation, then it detests, then gathers its information, communicates with the initial C2, sends back more information, then they would use a second C2 as a proxy to execute commands on the hosts and transition to a hands-on keyboard attack. Any questions so far?
The one.
Yes, Baden.
What does the SolarWinds software actually like do?
So the SolarWinds is a IT company based out of Austin, Texas, and they provide lots of networking and other solutions to companies. Specifically, Orion is a network manager, which is when you have like, and it's a network manager and a kind of like a log server, but it's a valuable tool on your infrastructure when you have like a couple hundred servers, thousands of employees. Helps you keep things nice and orderly.
Cool.
This is wild. I'm looking at that, but this is wild. Oh, this is wild.
Oh yes, it gets better too.
That's fucking new, man.
So after they've established their backdoor and they've established their persistence, they started to switch to a more active role on the boxes by transitioning to customized Cobalt strike droppers and uploading and downloading malware onto the hosts. But as I mentioned before, avoiding detection was one of their key parts of their mentality and how they wanted to go about this attack. So one of the things that they really tried to do was separate the backdoor from the malware droppers as much as possible. And they did that, and they spun up new threads just to kind of keep things separate, so that in the event that the malware payloads were discovered and it wouldn't lead back to the backdoor, and they would be able to maintain their persistence and keep on the offensive. So the other real thing that was happening here, as they knew that there would be multiple cases of Orion within the same infrastructure, they customized each deployment for that specific box. So each host had its own collection of compromised DLL files that became part of the malware. So you would see like 3 or 4 files that looked like Windows files that were supposed to exist but actually weren't. But you wouldn't see those anywhere else if you looked across all of the compromised hosts. And this took a long time, which is why, like, when this process kind of started in like mid 2020, things weren't really done until late 2020. This took about like 6 months to do. And the other thing that was really interesting to see, though they had access to over 400 of the Fortune 500 companies, they didn't attack each single one. They took the time to evaluate and profile their targets so that they could get the most reward for their effort. So RainDrop and TEARDROP are 2 customized Cobalt strike malware droppers that were found on the compromised hosts. Both of them are malicious DLLs that were injected onto the boxes, but they are executed slightly differently. TEARDROP is the first one that was evaluated by Microsoft, It's a malware loader, and you can call it as a service DLL or as a non-standard, as a standard non-service DLL. Whereas with RainDrop, it's also a malware loader, but it's triggered at the DLL entry point. How that specifically works, I had not enough time to research, but that is the difference. So here's a timeline of everything that has happened, for the most part, up to December. So, as I kind of mentioned, in February is like when they started to deploy and execute the backdoors, and then they started distributing TEARDROP and RainDrop in May, and it wasn't really discovered until December. So they had access to these compromised hosts for over 6 months. So in December, on December 11th, it was reported from FireEye to SolarWinds that they'd been breached, and within 4 days, Microsoft had completely took out the majority of this attack and kind of stopped it right in its tracks. The first step, you have to be Microsoft. And this is a how to stop a massive, year-long planned supply chain attack in 5 easy steps. 1, be Microsoft. Kind of hard to do, but if you got it, you'll understand you got it. Number 2, yank the certificates. So one of the reasons why this attack was allowed, when undiscovered for so long, was that all of the code was in signed files from Microsoft certificates within the Orion product. So if you have signed code, that means 1, it was supposed to be there, and 2, you have easier access to escalate privileges and do more nefarious things because your code is supposed to be there. So Microsoft found the certificates that the code was using and yanked them so that the code was no longer signed. The second thing that they did, they turned on Windows Defender just to throw up alerts if they found compromised files on the system, so that companies had a bit of a heads up as to what was going on and have time to take action against it before Microsoft did something more drastic. The fourth thing that the third thing that they did, which is a common thing for them, they went to the legal side, and they went to the courts, and they got a court order to get IANA to give them rights to the domain that the C2s were calling back to. If you guys remember back to TrickBot in September of 2020, this was what they did to take out over 100 of TrickBot's C2s across the world. They got a court order to take control of the domains, and basically were able to just completely cut off that attack as well. So when the hosts went to go call back to the C2, well, the attackers lost that callback because they don't own the domain anymore, and Microsoft was actually able to get more information about compromised hosts and who was actually still under threat and under fire. The fifth thing that they did was they changed the Windows Defender from alert to quarantine, which would essentially crash any system that had the malicious files on them, but also delete the file in the process. So it was this last step that they were able to extremely eradicate the compromised files and end the attack. So there were some tangential problems that came with this attack. It was originally reported by FireEye that their threat modeling tools were stolen, and FireEye is one of the leading cybersecurity firms in the nation. And the reason why they got stolen was because they were using SolarWinds software, and the attacker was able to exfiltrate that data and those tools. And I would expect that those tools will be seen again in the future as the attackers go to use it. Additionally, this is the first documented case of a golden SAML attack being used in the wild. This this is enough grounds for like another time presentation about golden ticketing and like Kerberos and SAML ticketing. But to kind of keep it simple, they were able to add a federated federated server that was able to forge SAML tickets, which means that they were able to gain access to any Microsoft 365 product. They were able to gain access to Azure, and they were basically able to fake out their identity and gain access to all of these things that are normally very difficult to fake. Malwarebytes is also hacked, but they only gained access to a little bit, so it wasn't really anything too bad. I think it was just like one internal email server that was breached. Cobalt Strike is seeing some ramifications from the attack, as they've had their droppers misused, and they're kind of reviewing their code and seeing what they can do better in the future. It's also important to note that Duo Push plays into this a little bit. SolarWinds on their part did have multi-factor authentication enabled, but the attackers were able to compromise the authentication server that was used for multi-factor authentication. Basically forged the cookies that the server was looking for. So when you took those two things together, there was really no point to having multi-factor authentication. And it has also been noted that while this happened to Duo servers, it wasn't really their fault, because it's not often that you gain access to such a high level server in breach, so there wasn't much that they could do about it. And all of the other companies and federal agencies that were hacked, we don't really understand what the data loss and exfiltration there was. So here's some key takeaways from this attack. This has been an extremely successful supply chain attack, and the security industry is seeing, we'll definitely see a transition towards those as enterprise security only increases in companies and they become more reliant on third-party software and solutions. Those third-party systems will become the target of more attacks. And I mean, the real reason why this was so big is because SolarWinds and Orion, like their Orion software, was being used by so many organizations. If the attackers had taken the time to only breach one company, we would probably only have like 5 reports, because it takes that much more time to get through enterprise security layers. Whereas going after a third-party solution gives you access to everything and everyone that they are a supplier for. And then we'll definitely, so back in 2017, it was first documented that a golden SAML attack was possible. But this is the first time that it was documented in the wild. It's a complicated attack to pull off, but these attackers were clearly sophisticated enough to do it, and we will only see more of this being used in the future after this proof of concept happened. Additionally, they were able to bypass the multi-factor authentication because of the compromise of cookies and the OAuth server. But those two things are both topics for another presentation. Lastly, all of their code was signed before Microsoft yanked the certs, and that was one of the main reasons why they were able to avoid detection for so long. Any questions? Let me check the Twitch. Nothing in the Twitch, so yeah.
There's more people here than normal.
Yeah, so
More people in the Zoom right now than there was the entirety of last night.